Welcome back, everybody, to the newest episode of the New York Only podcast. We are your everything real estate experience here in the New York metro area. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by a good friend and colleague, Mr. Jim Weir. How are you today, Jim?
I am fantastic. Matthew, and yourself?
I am doing wonderful. Still having flashbacks to the tiki bar get together at your house.
Well, that was a good thing to flash back on. I hope those flashbacks are enjoyable.
That is my favorite piece of real estate. Honestly, nothing beats hanging out under your tiki bar and having a cocktail or two.
I have some interesting video of that, which I'll show you at another time. But I was able to capture a couple of good moments, one of which was you reloading, going back behind the bar, grabbing a couple more Coronas and dishing them out to everybody.
So anyone who's curious about some of these illicit videos Jim has, reach out to us at the show, get in touch, and maybe we'll let you see some of them. Jim, tell everyone a little bit about yourself beyond just your photography and hostmanship.
My claim to fame is as a real estate appraiser. I'm state certified real estate appraiser in the state of New York. I've had about a 20-year career. I think, if memory serves, I started in 2002, and was on my own by 2005. In the appraisal world, at least when I started up now, you would get in you would test, and then you would work for someone to get your hours in, sort of being mentored as an apprentice. But the license really wasn't really yours. The certified guy would sign off on all your work. So you were running around as a trainee, doing all the hard stuff, writing the reports, doing the inspections and learning. And then you gain enough experience to go off on your own. You took the test, you were certified, you were able to do work for yourself. So that was always the goal. And I was fortunate that when I started, the real estate market was not unlike it has been the last couple of years. It was flying. This was, the early 2000s, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7 were great years. And then the end of 7 and into 8, things got a little rocky. In 2009, it really fell off the cliff, so to speak. So when I was training and learning, things were busy as hell. I started working on Long Island. My teacher, who was great to me and really experienced, was running about 20 different appraisers out of his one little shop in Farmingdale. And we were all running around doing 3 and 4 a day. And we were coming home at night and dropping thousands and thousands of dollars cash on his desk. So it was a nice little gig he had going there for a while. And I was just one of the horses in his stable. I was learning. And I started off in Levittown doing little Levitt capes, because there was sort of a simple area to learn in because of the market is so homogenous. They were all built around the same time. Now, whereas they all are similar in that they have no basements and, the furnace is under the stairs the way they were originally built. They've changed drastically over the years because people go up and out and they morph into all sorts of strange things. But in terms of a market area to learn to be an appraiser, it was ideal. And that's where I started. But then I graduated and started being sent out to do different things. And my career working for Jim Carney at JC Appraisals was really very advantageous for me because I was working under a very smart man with a lot of experience. He came from the financial, he used to work for Dime Bank. So he understood the lending part from the other perspective. And then he started his appraisal company and taught his people how to play the game the way the lenders want it played. And it was an education to learn. So I was fortunate. And then he liked me, so he kept throwing me into different market areas. And I ended up starting in Levittown, and then I was working all over Nassau and Suffolk County. And then I was working further east because as you got out east, like the Hamptons and Montauk and whatnot out there with those properties, it's very competitive amongst the realtors. And as an appraiser trying to gain information, you really had to finesse your way into situations and relationships so that you could just gather data, because they have their own little MLS, which they held on to, they clutched to. They wouldn't let anybody near because they didn't want any competition. So for a couple of years, I worked out east doing all that kind of work and got to see some extraordinary properties and gain some more experience. And then just life went on. I was with Jim for about 5 or 6 years. And then I went off on my own. And from there, what developed was a style of work that worked for me in terms of my process. When I was trained and working for Jim Carney in his stable, I had to go out, do 3 or 4 inspections a day, go home, write 3 or 4 appraisals, and also get ready for 3 or 4 the next day. So it was a real grind. It was a compressed, nonstop, just go, 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 make money kind of a thing. What I found was that didn't work for me in terms of my lifestyle. And when I went off on my own, I had developed a reputation amongst a couple of lenders, big ones, and they offered me a situation where if I would go to the Bronx and Westchester, even though I lived on Long Island, and do work for them because they liked my work, I wouldn't require me doing the 24-hour turnaround. So that morphed into me going out one day, doing 3 or 4 inspections, coming home, writing them up the next day, then going out the next day. And now I'm every other day in the field, and it's working for me. And I use that model for the rest of my career. To this day, I still work that way. You know, it's very easy to just stack all your inspections, and that you get out of control with all this work piled up. And then you just got to try and get it all completed, and you can be overwhelmed and feel like you're always digging yourself out of a hole. So for me, that's what developed out of the learning experience. I got great experience under a great teacher or a mentor. I was able to go out on my own and create a life for myself that worked. And, I raised my children and did okay, working as an appraiser for many years. So but then, of course, things happened after 08 and 09. That was the big crash, and, the wonderful governor that we had here until he just recently got thrown out, made an example of or tried to make an example of all the appraisers, saying it was all the appraisers' fault. And a lot of appraisers did go to jail for doing some, shady things. But I was always an honest guy, so I wasn't really about it because I didn't do anything wrong. I always was very careful with what I signed my name to. And if I did the job, I did the job right. Never really pushed the numbers. But Andrew Cuomo changed all the rules, put the management companies in place, effectively ended all your relationships with banking officers, or really with individuals, because I used to know people that I trusted as an individual, and they would move around in their careers. Now they're working for Chase, now they're working for this, now they're working over here, now they're working over there. And as long as I had the relationship with them, I could always get work. So my work would come in from different sources based on relationships. When Cuomo did away with that you couldn't do that anymore, you now have to put a management company in between. It meant they changed all the forms that I still to this day, as a reminder, I call my forms 2005 forms, because it was in 2005 that the writing was on the wall before the big crash. The government changed, the state of New York changed all the forms, changed the way in which everything was done. So whereas I used to be able to complete forms in a half an hour, 45 minutes each time, now it was taking me 2 or 3 hours because there was more to do, more detail, what have you. So that was 05 to 08 when it crashed in 09. And then the management companies, and it effectively took all the cash away. There was no cash money, and nobody was paying cash anymore. So the business changed radically. The paper trails, the management companies, the whole industry flipped inside out. A lot of appraisers got out of the business. Guys I used to know, they just quit. They said, you can't make any money in this anymore. I significantly took a big hit financially from where I was in terms of making money. But I tried to hold on. I kept thinking things were going to get better, Still not so sure that was a great idea, but I have survived, So that was what was going on. Now, the question really is, what did I learn from all that? And what I learned from all that is there are some eerie resemblances between where we are right now to what I lived through, from 05 through 09 when it fell off the cliff. And the eerie resemblances, they can't be denied. I'm starting to see the same sort of behavior from the lenders. They're asking me to revisit appraisals that I've done 2 and 3 and 6 months, 8 months ago. They're asking me if the values are still there. So in other words, they're asking me to reconsider values that I appraised months ago because they're concerned. What's happening? And I remember that in 05 and 6 and 7, where I started getting more and more of these reconsiderations of values, of stuff that was done months and months and months ago. And they're asking me to revisit it and recertify that value was still the same because the market was changing or was about to change. Well, I'm getting those things again from the lenders. So I know something's going on. And if you look at historically, Matthew, most everyone, even with a cursory understanding of real estate, has heard the term, inventory. Inventory is really low. That's the big buzzword. Inventory is low. Right now, they're saying inventory is low, so the prices are really high and there's bidding wars, right? And that's the way it's been for the last few years. So inventory in and of itself is a wonderful indicator of the health and strength of the housing market, right? Well, if you look at historically where inventory was at its low point, going back before the 2009 absolute crash, the low point was around 3.5 or something. This is national, it was 3.5 or so months of inventory, right? And then when it crashed, it was in 12 point something months of inventory. And then it fell off the cliff. Well, if you look historically, I could actually show you something if you want. Can I share my screen?
Sure.
You might. I think this might be interesting. Just take a look at this. How do I share my screen? You have to allow me to share, right? Share screen. Sharing. Are you seeing my screen?
I am.
You am? Let me see here. I had it here. Oh, here we go. All right, you see this? This is Fred. It's the Fed, and it's a graph looking at inventory in the United States, right? And it goes back over the years. If you look at this, right? It's an up and down sort of graphing of inventory highs and lows. And if you look at this, the gray areas, these gray columns are periods of recession, right? And you look at, this is 2003 at the low point. If you're looking at this graph moving along at the low point here, 2003, 3.5 months of inventory, 2003. And then it took 6 years from this low point of inventory to get to the high point of inventory, which was January 2009, 12.2, and then the crash. So that's represented by the graph now spiraling down, okay? Then it moves along, new lows, 2020, down here, right? New lows, 2020, 3.5 again. Look at that, there we are in that 3-ish range. Now, here's the thing. What took 6 years to go from this low to this high has taken a couple of months to go from this low to up in the tens, I think, as of July. Okay, so August, as of July, 10.4. So a couple of months to gain all that inventory back. It's coming flying back up. And we know that at 12 point something, and it fell and it crashed. So record time in a couple of months to go from an absolute low to on our way towards a high where things crash. And why is that happening? It's what the Fed does. It's money speak for quantitative easing and tightening. Okay, quantitative easing is when they're throwing money into the game, and everybody's fat, dumb, and happy. Okay, they're throwing money in trillions of dollars into all the markets. Commodities and real estate and the stock market, right? So everybody's happy. Okay, and then at some point they said this isn't good. We got to start taking money out. So what happened is, at the tail end of 2021, they started doing the opposite, taking money out. So taking money out, interest rates are starting to go up, inventory's starting to climb. And that's the climate that we're in now. And my point is, historically speaking, we're in trouble if you're looking at the housing market, okay? We knew for all this time when things were flying along, we were like, hey, everybody's making money, times are great. It can't stay like this forever. Everybody was saying that. But you look historically at the indicators, low here to high crash, low here, 2020, on our way up to very close to where it crashed in record time, a couple of months. Something's got to give. Now, the media.
You know what's funny, Jim? Seeing this for the first time as a real estate broker, I generally have my pulse based on what my clients are looking for, how many new houses are getting listed in their searches. not so much nationwide. So I haven't maybe in our specific region felt this kind of uptick that you're showing. But I will say I agree with the data just from a sentiment standpoint of rates have gotten to a point where people who need to buy a home, they're buying a moderately priced home, going from 3.5 to the high sixes, low sevens that we're at now. It sucks, but it's not necessarily a deal breaker. Now, in Westchester County, out in Nassau, Suffolk County, where you are, you're not getting a home under $500,000, right? That's kind of your point of entry. On a $500,000 loan, a 3% change in interest is roughly $1,500 a month.
That's a killer
to the budget.
Yeah, that's a killer.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Investors aren't going to buy at that rate unless there's some serious cash flow on top of it. Yep. I'm not going to sell my house and buy another house when I've got 4% on my mortgage now, and I'm going to go to over 7.
Yep.
And that's contributing to that excess of inventory.
Yes. And again, like as you so clearly stated, seen through the lens as a realtor, which is your lens you're looking at it from, you got to be aware of this type of stuff. I'm seeing it from more of a, what's the market doing? You know, my job as an appraiser is to call it what it is, you know, regardless of what I think it's going to do. I just said, this is what's happening. So I'm going to look out for that. And this is national, this stuff, right? And New York in and of itself is its own animal. You know, Manhattan's its own animal. For the Westchester, you know, there's even parts of Suffolk and everything else are their own animals. When things went bad, they went really bad in pockets all around, you know, and a lot of it has to do with economic, you know, levels. But it's how bad they're going exactly nobody knows, but it will be affected, and it hasn't really hit yet. I've done to date one appraisal where I've said it has not been an increasing market in the last couple of months. I did one appraisal where I couldn't find any data that said things are still flying along. I was, you know, days on market was really, was well out over 90 days. And I hadn't seen that in years. You know, days on market is usually, you know, for a while there, they were selling things over the weekend. It was, you know, everybody had 20 or 30 different offers there. It was insane.
This has become such a pervasive talking point that when I send listings to a client, they will question me when they say it's been on the market 121 days. What's wrong with it?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's just immediately an assumption that if no one's bought it yet, there is something wrong with it.
And it is a legitimate question from a buyer or an informed buyer, you know, given what's been happening last. But that's where we've been. We've been in this, you know, in the speak of guys who did, the guy who showed me this says these are called sideways channels. You know, when you're between the recessions and it's kind of going up, down, up, down, up, down, and it's moving sideways. So that's kind of healthy. And what the Fed actually wants is that's what they want. Everybody's kind of happy. Everything's healthy. Everything's good. But the pandemic affected everything, that they started throwing money in, the quantitative easing. So really from the beginning of the pandemic, they threw so much money in that things were streaming along. Okay. And now they said, we want that money back. We want to get back to this sideways channel where everybody's happy. You know, so they're tightening. They started tightening at the end of 2021, the last quarter. And I think I read an article. Let me see if I can show it to you here. I think it's still, I was just Googling, I was thinking about our conversation, thinking I'd have to explain this. I understand it only cursory, you know, a cursory understanding, but this was an article on Madison Investments, and I was asking about quantitative tightening versus easing, just to sort of get a definition of it. And they were talking, I thought their last paragraph was telling, okay, the effects of quantitative tightening. In other words, we know that we're in a quantitative tightening place now. The Fed is pulling money back after they threw it in for the last couple of years. They're pulling money out. So it says here that as the quantitative tightening process takes money out of the financial system, some borrowing costs are bound to rise. So just as quantitative easing drove interest rates down, quantitative tightening can be expected to put pressure on them to rise. And here's the thing. How this process plays out with respect to market liquidity and valuation remains to be seen and warrants close monitoring over the coming year. Now, my point is, when you look at this stuff, man, we're getting real close to this thing being historically about where it's going to fall off the cliff, you know, but we're not there yet, you know. Now you've got the political stuff. I don't want to get political, but the political stuff does affect this. You know, a lot of stuff is going to happen in the next couple of months, as a matter of fact, weeks. And we'll see what happens. But you just got to keep an eye on it, and you need to be aware. I know right now, the big time investors right now are pulling back and changing. If you're looking at these fix and flippers and buy and holders, things like that, they're like, the cash buyers out there are like pulling their money out. They're really worried because of what's going to happen. They know that they're going to stick around and wait for this to happen, and it falls off the cliff. They're going to jump back in and buy, grab a bunch of stuff so that they can sell it when things flip around again, and it inevitably will.
Well,
So it's just a matter of a strategy that people are employing. But as an appraiser, I look at, okay, well, where are we in this cycle, so to speak? And my opinion, which is essentially what an appraiser is, you give an appraisal, it's just your opinion. Your opinion is supposed to be by someone who has some knowledge of what's going on. My opinion is that as of July, 10.4, trouble somewhere around 12. We got to 10.4 from 3 in just a couple of months. Trouble's around the corner in terms of the market taking a crash. And then, of course,
it doesn't help that we're seeing historic inflation as well, right? So those flippers, it's costing, if you bought a house 6 months ago, your cost of lumber shot up possibly as much as 200% somewhere in the last 6 to 12 months.
So what's the moral of the story? In an ascending inventory phase, which is where we are, right? Inventory's flying back up again, right? If you got to change your strategy and think about what you want to do from an investment standpoint, if you're in real estate, and those
from an appraisal
stuff, they're going to take a bath, Like I worry for guys like Sean, high end, this, that, and everything else. Man, this might not be the time to be doing that. If you want to buy it and fix it up and hold it, and rent it for a while, hold on to it for when things turn around, that kind of thing. That's better strategy, I think. It's not the time to be, buying land and trying to get it all permitted up and things like that, because you just don't know. And it looks like we're being set up for a fall, and the fall's going to happen. The problem really is, I think that so many people don't look at just data for what it is. They're influenced by the idiots that they see in the media. And right now, the government doesn't want you to know any of this. Why wouldn't they teach this in school? This was shown to me in about 10 minutes 2 weeks ago. And I grabbed it and I said, wow, this just makes so much sense to me. Nobody teaches you this shit.
Well, number one, the government doesn't want us to know anything, because if people really understood quantitative easing and fiscal policy, they'd realize there's probably no reason for the Fed to even exist. But that's a whole other conversation.
That's a whole other conversation. Yeah.
Where
but the August 2022 observation, 8.1% more. Okay, August 22.
The thing about numbers is they don't lie, right? I mean, you can if you can't take emotion out of it, though, you will try to make the numbers tell you what you want them to say.
Yes.
But if you look at it with no emotion, no vested interest, and just use the numbers at face value, you'll realize exactly what you just said. I mean, it's like watching a stock chart throughout history. Mm-hmm. See what happened before a crash, you start to see it happen again. It might be time to pull some cash out of the market.
Yeah. Or at least,
right? History
repeats itself. Or at least watch closely for a while here. Really keep an eye on it, really pay attention, because the indicators that are telling you that something's going to happen. It looks like something's going to happen soon. I mean, that's that type of a historic, it literally is historic. What's happened from like May or June of 2020 to now is historic in its own sense. That things flew up that high, that fast in terms of inventory coming flying back. And it was the pandemic and the quantitative easing and all the money was thrown into this to keep things moving along. And then how much of that was mismanaged and everything else is a whole other story. But you can't deny that it happened. These are factors. And these factors, if we're staying on the theme for me as an appraiser, these are things that affect value in the market. Okay, so you have to look at all these factors, to give an opinion that's grounded in fact and also, rounded out by your experience. And that's what you're being asked to do. You're being asked to give your opinion, and the assumption is that your opinion is rooted in both fact and experience. And this is why, people value your opinion. You get paid to do stuff, but.
So I'm curious from a strategy standpoint, someone like yourself, right? You've been doing this, let's say 20, as many years as you've been, right? You were in that spike area. So you may have a little more experience than maybe an appraiser who's only been doing this 10 years. But from June 2020 to, I'll call it January 2022, just for argument's sake, inventory prices were going up what seemed like 10% a month, right? Something that sold in June for 500,000 by January of 2021 may have been 550,000. By January of 2022, it was very well in the range of 625.
Yeah.
And your look back, right, is 180 days. You're going to look at comparable sales within 6 months. How did you adjust for the fact that things were just like throwing a dart at a board?
Well, it's really about you're not going back that far. You know, you're looking primarily at the most recent data, you know, whereas you might go back 6 months to a year. I was trained on, you know, within the last year, preferably within the last 90 days. Now, in the climate that it has been changing so much, it was the last 90 days, period. We don't want to know nothing. And the banks weren't accepting anything for a while there. They really wanted the most recent data. Okay. And then, of course, they wanted to back it up. So now, we used to always put an example of a couple of active sales and some pending sales to sort of round out what was happening you know, to help bolster your opinion. It got to be they only wanted the pendings. They don't want to hear anything listed because people were, you know, they were fat, dumb, and happy with everything that was happening on. So they were shooting for the moon, listing stuff, and a lot of times they were getting well close to the moon. So the listing data really became doesn't make any sense.
Well, even the pending data, that seems counterintuitive because the contract price is not disclosed in a pending listing.
That's true, but it's closer to usually what it's in terms of percentages. You know, what it goes into contract, you know, contract for what it actually sells for. That's much tighter than what it was listed for versus what it sells for. You know, that's a wider gap. So the pending sales really became more valuable, I think. And I for a while there wasn't putting any listings at all on there, unless I thought it made sense and it was an absolute, you know, carbon copy or something that it needed to be addressed, or it was on the subject street or something like that. But to answer your question, all I did basically was say I would tighten up my process to more recent sales, and try to really stay within 9 months, within a month. You know, that's and because the market was flying along, it was not that hard to do. You know. But
I once had an appraiser tell me that the strategy is different on a purchase versus a refinance because in his mind, the purchase price of a property, the best indicator is what two people are willing to pay and get. How do you feel about that?
Not so sure I agree on that, because I think it's really splitting hairs. You know, if people agree on a price, the concept of arm's length comes into play, and an arm's length transaction should be something that's not just two people agreeing on it, but that it also was exposed to the marketplace for an adequate amount of time. So if it's exposed to the marketplace an adequate amount of time, and everybody has a chance to get a look at it, and then two people agree on it, ostensibly that's an arm's length transaction, and that speaks to where things, quote, are in the market. When two people agree on something, it could be for any number of reasons, distress or whatnot, or family or nepotism, any kind of a thing, but then it's not really exposed to the marketplace. It hasn't been out there listed for everybody to look at it, so it's not the same type of a sale.
So I mean more in a situation of what we saw in the pandemic. You get a house that's listed on a Friday. Realistically, if you did your comps and everything, let's say you come up with 500,000. It shows the weekend, it gets 35 offers, and it goes in contract for $750,000 in a bidding war.
Yeah.
Realistically, the data doesn't support $750,000.
Yeah.
But there were 34 people involved in this bidding war that thought it was worth at least somewhere in that area.
Yeah,
Does that
I had dozens of appraisals like that over the last couple of years.
I'm sure you did.
Because I had to say to the bank, I can't really explain it, but this is what it's sold for. These are what the comps are, and I feel that went over asking. And what I began doing was really quizzing the realtors, and they would say, "Oh yeah, it's real popular. We have no." I would say, "How many?" And I would put it in the, per realtor, there was 18 bids on this, and I was using that to sort of essentially saying, "It's out of my hands here. This is what the comps are saying. It's there. The value is certainly there, but the fact that it went so much over asking, I have no control." And it's a factor of the low inventory and then people's uncertainty, and the climate that we're in. And it was there, things like people running out of the city and this, that, and everything else were factors in what affected real estate, but they weren't the only reason for it. I believe that the world was shaken up by the pandemic. People were scared, and fear is very subjective, and you can't quantitative quantify it. It's everybody's fear is different. There were people who were terrified, who were running up into Westchester to get out of the city because they felt it was safer there. And there were also other people who I believe were more like, hey, we ain't gonna live forever, and if we were ever thinking of making that move, let's do it now. And I believe that's more of what was happening in the world than people just being terrified. I think that it was a kick in the gut for the whole world that life is fragile, and that if you're putting something off thinking one day, when the kids get older, or one day, I don't want to die in this house, this isn't where I want to be for the rest of my life, let's do it now. So there was an urgency that sort of came into the market. And
I agree with you completely. I don't like the term the Great Resignation, but the Great Reassessment is definitely more like it, because this was more than just a career thing. As you said, people were thinking holistically, like, is this really where I want to be? Right? If I'm trapped in my house, people in Manhattan were probably only in their homes before the pandemic, just to sleep and an hour or two a day. Now you're relegated there for the entire day. You really start to think, do I really even like being here? Why am I here?
Yeah. And so I did, all of those things come into play, I think. But, I would hear many realtors when I was out there doing inspections with their opinions of what this, that, and everything else. And for the most part, I listened, but I didn't agree with a lot of it. I just felt that, straight economics drives more things more than anything else. If you got the money, you can do it, you do it. If you want the house, you can afford it, you make it work, do it. If you can sell it for this much and get out, boom, I saw it in my own life. I bought my house 20 odd years ago, and I was able to sell the little house that I married my wife in. And it was I was not in real estate then. This was before I became an appraiser. And I just looked at this house and I said, this is a nice little house. She had a fire in it, and it was a cape that was dormered. And she put a big master bedroom and 2 bedrooms. So it was a 4-bedroom. It was a cape with 1 bedroom on the first floor and 3 bedrooms upstairs. One was a big master with big closets. It was a dormered cape. And it had a full finished basement with a kitchen. So I was like, this is a rentable property in Brentwood, Long Island. I says, this house will sell. There's no reason why people don't. So the realtors came around, they were telling me what they thought I should put it on the market for, and they wanted the listing. And we listened to a few of them. And I looked at my wife and I says, let's just try and sell it ourselves. Let's see what we get. So in one weekend, I sold the house with multiple bids. I was marching people through the house as I was talking to people lined up, coming through the house, this, that, and everything else. The very first person who came actually bought the house. And they came over here to give me some sort of deposit. They felt it was good. They would give me a check for $5,000. It was going to hold it. I was like, means nothing in the real world. I didn't know that at the time. I said, I'll gladly take your check. But here's the thing. Oh, excuse me. That's the door. And I went to the door and I said, oh, just hang on one second. We just sit on the couch for a minute. And I walked the whole other family through the house right in front of them and showed them. I said, well, just in case this falls through. And they were like, no, we want this house. And that's the way it went. And then for the next week, people were still calling, and I showed them the house, and I backed up 6 or 7 people that would buy my house if the deal fell through. And I did it in a weekend. It took me from Thursday when I put the ad in the paper, and by Saturday I had it locked up, and I backed up for a whole other week. And I was just, so I've seen it happen in my own life, and I know what people think. That enabled, and I actually was supposed to buy a house in Stony Brook. We were about to sign the contract on a Wednesday, and on a Sunday before, my sister-in-law said, "Oh, you should look at this little thing that I found. It's something in Kings Park, which is where I live." It was around the corner from my sister, almost on the same block, but on different streets. Our backyards almost touch. And we looked at that, said, "Oh my goodness, we're getting so much more for the house in Bayshore," because I listed it much higher than the realtors were telling me it was going to go for. Got people coming out, got my price. And then that extra 30 grand that I got on that enabled me to make the numbers work for the house in Kings Park. So I dropped out of the house in Stony Brook that I was supposed to go with and bought the house in Kings Park. And that enabled me to, have the quality of life that I've had to raise my children, and including eventually my tiki bar, so. But that was just, I was in the right place at the right time. I had a commodity that was saleable in a market that things were flying along and people wanted it. And, it allowed me to do it. So I think people see smart people who say, if I have an urgency to make a life change, and right now my house is my biggest asset, and they're selling like hotcakes, honey, we're selling the house, And I think that was more of a factor than fear and this, that, and everything else. People just said, let's do it. If we're going to do it, let's do it now. This can't last forever. Let's do it now. Anyway, that's long-winded on that, Matt. I'm sorry, but
that's fine. Jim, I'm curious, what's one of your favorite things about real estate?
Well, I can take that one or two ways. If it's my favorite thing about my job in real estate, obviously that's seeing the homes, talking to the people. I've been privileged. I think I've been in literally tens of thousands of homes over my career. I don't know how to quantify it exactly, but I know that for my license, I had to show thousands and thousands of appraisals, before I would get my license, 4,000, 3,000, 5,000. I had that because I was so busy when I was an apprentice. I had so much experience. And I know that was just in the first few years. I had thousands and thousands, and it's continued, not at that pace, but I got 20 years in now. So it's hard to really quantify, but I've easily been in, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of homes. And yet I can remember almost every one. Sometimes I drive past a home that I appraised many, many years ago. Can't remember what I appraised it for, but I remember the house, and I remember the person, and I remember the rooms, and I remember the features. And that's sort of fun for me. I really enjoy that. Seeing people emotionally invested in getting a house that they're excited about, young families starting out, getting their first home, things like that, solving the problems for people in their lives. And, there's a big emotional investment in residential real estate. There's a lot of emotion tied to it. It's the house you grew up in. It's the house you raised your kid in. It's the house you always wanted. It's the house I can't wait to get away from. There's so much emotion in it. And being part of that was fun for me. And I like to think of myself as an honest appraiser and doing the job right and correctly for people, helping people out, making sure that they can get, what they need and they're moving on with their lives. I've always taken much pride in that. So for me, I think seeing the people, being part of the process that allows them to see their dreams come true, or at least help them to the next step in their life, I feel like I'm contributing in some positive way to people's experience. So for me, that's, I think, what my favorite thing is.
I love it. And I'm glad you brought us back to the word emotion, because your story of selling your house on your own sounds like it went incredibly well. But I'm curious, in your professional opinion, the average person who doesn't know real estate, do you advise that they try to sell their own home, or is it better to use a professional?
Obviously, I wouldn't advise that, because what I think people don't realize about real estate is the complexity. Okay. If you break it down and you want to give a broad brush, simple example, I learned this from my mentor. It says, real estate is nothing but an agreement between two people to sell a house for a certain price, right? Broad brush. But there's so much emotion involved and so many features, this, that, and everything else, that it's always a process. And generally speaking, you don't get the first house that you like and you want and you go into contract for. It's just the way things work. Because there's too many factors, especially when you have banks involved. How many people have you heard? Well, I know you've heard many because you're in the business, but most anyone has heard of a situation where someone looked to buy a house, thought they had a buyer, the buyer was pre-qualified, and something went wrong, and the deal freaking fell through. Well, that's the emotional roller coaster that people who are looking about that they go through. And more often than not, in my experience, it is not the very first house that you think you're going to get that you end up with. You get in the game, so to speak, and you get out there. You find a house, you like it, you work towards it, you take the steps you have to, you get a realtor, they get the things, they bring the buyer to the table, the buyer pre-qualifies, you're hoping everything goes through, and then something unforeseen happens and the deal collapses or whatnot, and now you have to start again, and this sort of thing. And that's the way I advise people in my family who come to me and ask me about questions. And I say, well, remember, it's a process. I've done it with all my children. My daughter, when she bought in Maryland, was down there, and she's really detail oriented. My daughter, she's on everything, and I said, honey, you may not end up with the first house you look, so just hang in there, just get in the game, see it through, push your things, do everything you can. It's some of it's luck, some of it's prayer, some of it's, you just don't know. What you do know is that you want to buy a house, and you and your husband are looking, and you're pregnant and you have some emergency, yada yada. I get that. And that's what happened. They get into the deal fell apart. And then they found the second one, which was actually a much better deal than the other one for them in the long run. But I see it oftentimes. You don't end up with the very first one that you look at that you think you're going to get for whatever reason. And that's a process that I try to warn people about, but they won't hear it. They can't hear it. So to answer your question, if with no knowledge of anything about how real estate works, you think you're just going to wing it, I wouldn't do that.
Right. Don't
There's a place in the world for a good realtor. Of course, there are a lot of bad realtors, but there's a place in the good for. And what does a realtor really do? They're marriage counselors and handholders, and and that sort of thing. That's what a good realtor is. That's why I'm not a realtor, because I don't have the patience for it.
I feel like a therapist many days.
Oh, absolutely. And then you're kind of, as from the realtor's point of view, you're kind of hoping around and waiting for that thing to close so you can get paid. You're just not sure. You're just not sure. And you invested a lot of emotion and time in it. You're not sure. You're just not sure.
It's great.
And but when you hit big. You guys make a lot more money than I ever made. I mean, I never made a whole lot of money being an appraiser. I never did.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, that's because an appraisal is a commoditized service. Right. Everyone roughly knows what appraisers charge or what banks are willing to pay. And there is not a whole lot of wiggle room to say, well, I'm the best appraiser there is, because now the bank's going to pick you directly.
Yep. But the bank, you can't choose your appraiser. The bank has to choose their own. So you're at the mercy of whoever they send to see who you get, But that was what happened after 08, 09. That contributed greatly to that, We lost.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that's a separate thing,
Last question.
I'm transitioning out of this as we speak, transitioning out of being an appraiser. I've come to the end of my road as an appraiser. It was a good run, but it's time to get out,
I've got one last question for you.
Go ahead.
So you had mentioned earlier, banks expecting a 24-hour turnaround. I know that is no longer an expectation or a truth. What are you seeing today as the acceptable turnarounds to deliver an appraisal?
I'm not. You have to qualify acceptable. By who's acceptable? Who's acceptable?
By a professional standard for an appraiser who agreed to take the appraisal.
Any good, in my opinion, which is what you're asking me. Okay, any appraiser worth his salt should deliver it in 24 to 48 hours from when he sees it.
You might be shocked to hear this. You might not. Do you know the average time I wait on an appraisal?
Probably a week.
2.5 weeks.
Wow.
I had one during
COVID. My whole career, I've never gone 2.5 weeks to deliver an appraisal.
That's average. And that is a sampling size from New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, my own deals, my clients' deals. The quickest I have received an appraisal back in the last 2 years is 1 week.
Wow. See, that's not the way.
Because I can't pick you.
Yeah. That's not the way I was trained. I was trained differently. We were trained like a baseball. He used to say, you're like a baseball team and you got a batting average, and we're looking at it, And it was all about turn time. It's why I named my new business Turn Time, because it's an homage to the thing which drove me crazy when I was a young appraiser, which was the turn time.
And it goes back to kind of common sense and ethics. If I know I can't take clients out for 2 weeks, I'm not going to offer to be their realtor because they're going to lose a ton of opportunities in that 2 weeks.
Mhm.
As an appraiser, if you're scheduling the only open time slot in your calendar, hoping that they'll let you in on that date and you already have 100 reports backed up you haven't written, you probably shouldn't take the appointment.
Yeah. But that's the different schools of thought. I know appraisers who work like that. They just stack them. They get them out when they can, and that's just it. That's just the way I work. And I'm more of the school that I manage my supply so that I can give good service to that I take, like, and
Right. You manage your supply so you can fulfill the demand.
yeah, in a timely fashion, which makes me desirable. And of
Absolutely.
course, that you do the job right also. You gotta give quality work, and you gotta give quality work in as fast as possible. And that's the ideal, right? That's what you're working with.
Absolutely. Jim, this has been a pleasure. I mean, obviously, you and I have had conversations like this before, but never this in depth, never with the visuals. So I definitely feel like I learned something. Hopefully, those listening and watching learn something or have found a new desire to learn something and not just trust what's being shoved down their throats by the major news outlets and their cousin and their sister's uncle's brother, because data doesn't lie.
Yeah.
Opinions do.
And it's right there. It's right there in the data that we're due for a fall in the housing market, or a big correction, whatever you want to call it, and we're fast approaching that point where historically it always seems to go. You can look at the peaks, look at the high peaks, all back. This is going back to 1980s. That's that. These are back to savings and loan crises, all this stuff, all the high peaks, then it falls off from the peaks, this, that, and everything else. It's always the same indicators showing right before it. Whoa, the inventory comes flying back up from a historic low, and then boom. And right now it's flying back up faster than it's ever flown before, the inventory. So that marker right there is saying, okay, let's pay close attention right now, because any day now it's going to start going the other way. And we know that the Fed has said that they're going to continue to raise interest rates through 2023. They've said that. They're telling you they're going to continue to do that. So that's them taking their money out, quantitative tightening. They're taking their money out. There's another graph that I was shown. I wish I had it for you, but it showed historically where the Fed wants things, so that it does these sideways channels, and it's in trillions of dollars. And they had this spike since Biden took office in the pandemic. It was a spike, and now they want to bring that back down to right where everybody's happy again. And they're on their way doing it with that tightening. So something's going to happen with the real estate market in terms of a big correction, and it's going to happen fairly soon. We're on our way towards it.
Jim, if anyone was interested in reaching out to you, if they want to get a private appraisal done on their property, get an idea of what anything's worth before making their decision, how could they get in touch with you?
You could reach me basically by giving me a call. It's 631-672-3912. My email is jkwambit@gmail. Like ambit meaning my sphere of influence, my ambit, my JKW is James Kevin Weir. So jkwambit@gmail. And if I can help you, you can reach out to Matthew. Matthew will get in touch with me.
Absolutely. Jim, thank you so much. For everyone listening, you just spent this time with Matt Harms, broker owner of Time Away Realty Group, and Jim Weir, certified appraiser. You have his information. If you didn't catch it, please reach out to me in the show notes, or you could always email me, Matt, MATT, @timeawaygroup.com, and I'll be happy to get you in touch with Jim. Jim, always a pleasure. Looking forward to continuing this conversation another time.
Godspeed, bro. Nice seeing you, man.
Thank you, brother.
Bye-bye.